Welcome to the Made for Agriculture podcast.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Made for Agriculture podcast. I am your host, Landry Jones, and today we're going to be covering virtual fencing. That is the new, I shouldn't say really a new technology. It's been overseas for quite some time, but it's new to North America. And so we got some folks on here today to talk about that and help bring that information to you. And before we get started, I guess, with kind of some questions that I have, or before we get into the actual meat of the presentation, let's kind of go around the horn here and have everybody introduce themselves. I will start with Dan. Dan, if you would introduce who you are, kind of where you're located, maybe in Missouri, and just a little bit background on your operation and what y'all are doing.
Yeah, my name's Dan Bonacker. The farm's located in Cedar Hill, Missouri. That's just south of St. Louis, just a little bit. Mainly a row crop operation, corn, beans, do a little bit of rye and wheat. And then we have a registered Charolais herd that accompanies that. And a lot of conservation practices on the farm, no-till, cover crops. And in recent years, have been working toward animal integration, getting the cattle out on the row crop ground, and just improving upon that.
Yeah, great. And Kaitlyn?
Yeah. Hi Landry. I'm excited for today. This should be a lot of fun. My name is Kaitlyn Dozler. I grew up on my family's cow-calf operation in central Nebraska, and then went to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln for my undergrad. And it was actually during graduate school there I got started with virtual fence. We were the first virtual fencing project in the state of Nebraska. And then after grad school, I was able to transfer or take the job with the University of Missouri Center for Regenerative Ag, where I now manage our virtual fencing program. And so it's been a really fun couple of years getting to work with the technology and producers across multiple states.
Great. Well, thank you. And then last but certainly not least, Joe?
Yeah, my name is Joe Zeollner. I'm the conservation specialist with MFA Incorporated in partnership with NRCS. One of kind of my core competency in my role is to help Missouri farmers and ranchers adopt practices that implement soil, water, and wildlife habitat conservation into their working operations. So just kind of been interested in virtual fence from the get-go, and I'm excited to hear Dan and Kaitlyn's perspective on I think, it's kind of a no-brainer for incorporating livestock into a row crop operation or row crop farmer looking to implement managed grazing on their farm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I will, I guess, like I mentioned, virtual fencing is kind of new here to the United States, especially Missouri. In the past, MFA's kind of been looking at or promoting virtual fencing for several years now, at least kind of when the first company, which might have been Vince,
Yep.
you might correct me if I'm wrong there, Kaitlyn, it seemed like they were kind of the first on the scene, but they were and rightfully so, directed their efforts to the western side of the United States, where there's large expanses of fields and grazing lands. And that's kind of where it seems like some of the attraction came from or was. And here within the last couple of years, thanks to University of Missouri and the Center for Regenerative Agriculture, really started looking at that technology and how applicable it would be for producers here in Missouri. And obviously our I don't know what the average land size for producers, but it's quite small compared to out west, right? And so trying to adapt that technology that they kind of designed for out west and how it would be applicable for our producers here in the state is what University of Missouri has been looking at, and also the companies that are in the United States and available to producers. So I guess with that, Kaitlyn, I'll kind of turn it over to you. Tell folks, you mentioned the Center for Regenerative Agriculture, but what are you all doing with virtual fencing? Kind of when did it start, and what's the purpose of the research that you all are doing right now?
Yeah, definitely. So the Center for Regenerative Ag virtual fence program started in roughly October of 2024. We got a $900,000 grant through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to bring virtual fence education to Missouri producers. We really saw virtual fence as a new tool producers could use to really get livestock out on those cover crop fields and crop residue fields and different areas of their pastures they might not typically be able to use due to like physical fence constraints, time, labor, all of those different types of things. And so the goal of our program was just to get the technology in front of Missouri producers. And we figured the best way to do that was to get it in the hands of Missouri producers. So we have 5 private farms that we work with throughout the state, Dan being one of them. And then on top of that, we have about 4 university research farms. And so in total, we have just under, I think, about 600 virtual fence collars throughout the state in our program. And the whole goal is we want these producers to use the virtual fence collars as if they went out and bought them themselves. I want to know the great things that happen. I want to know the bad days, and I want to know everything in between, with the simple goal of giving Missouri producers an idea of how this technology works on a variety of farms in a variety of seasons, all of those different types of things before they go and make that financial investment themselves potentially.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think that's awesome. I mean, with a new technology like this, right, any new technology that comes to producers, especially when we're asking, and I don't want this to sound bad, but it seems like livestock producers are the slowest to adopt technology, right? I mean, our row crop folks have been adopting technology for a long time, and whether it's Operations Center with John Deere or Auto Steer, which what I mean, like it just seems like they adopt those technologies a little bit sooner than some of our livestock producers do. And so I guess I commend University of Missouri by looking at this technology and looking at it from a wide perspective, right? Trying to figure out, what technology, what maybe companies work better than others. And that may just be based on the management of that operation, right? I know there's some technology, and we'll probably get into this. There's companies that really only kind of deal with or have the ability to use on small ruminants. So knowing that information that's out there for producers, but also getting folks like Dan and some of the other producers to try it on their farm and to know what works and what doesn't. And I'm sure that's awesome feedback for the companies as well, right? That they've got, one-on-one communication with producers to know, again, what works and what doesn't. And if we can kind of get those bugs worked out on the front side of things, then it's going to be even better adoption for producers when they decide to take that leap of faith and really start implementing some of these practices. And so I think, again, that kudos to University of Missouri for doing that, not only just looking at it from a research standpoint on their own research farms, but allowing producers to come into this to really kind of get producers' perspectives. So what companies would be available for producers, and then maybe what companies are you looking at, if not all of them, I guess?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
So there's 5 virtual fence companies currently on the US market. So you have Vents, No Fence, Halter, East Shepherd, and Monil. So important thing just right off the bat, if you're a sheep and goat producer, No Fence is the only company currently serving small ruminants. So just kind of right off the bat from that standpoint of it. But on the cattle side of it, all 5 virtual fence companies are available to producers here in Missouri. With our program, we're working with 4 out of the 5. We're working with East Shepherd, Monil, Halter, and No Fence. The only reason we're not working with Vents is just simple conversations with their team and stuff like that. Just the high intensity grazing a lot of our Missouri producers want to do. Their collars are more designed for kind of the robust out west grazing systems versus the high intensity grazing systems here in Missouri. So they're not in our program, but it's always an option for producers if that's something that they want to go with.
Cool. And I guess let's kind of get into the technology side of things. I mean, I know, and we could probably make this podcast 4 hours if we needed to, but I guess kind of tell producers or tell listeners, is there major differences between the technology, and then when I say technology, as far as like the collar itself? I mean, it seems like most of the companies have a similar platform, and you can get into that as well, depending on whether we're using cell towers or we have a standalone system-based tower type system. But I guess just kind of walk through, folks, what the technology is, how it is applied to the animal, and then how the producer interfaces with that technology.
Yeah, definitely. So the easiest way I describe the technology to producers is think about it like a shock collar for your dog, except on a cow, sheep, or goat type of situation. And so what you're going to do is you're going to pick the company that you want to work with. All of the companies have the same kind of baseline technology. The collars run off of sound and shock stimuli. So it's a GPS enabled collar. The collar knows where those livestock are at all times. And basically, you, the producer, or Dan in this case, would go in on his phone or computer and draw those virtual fence boundaries just with the click of a mouse or just by pointing and clicking with your finger, the different shapes. And those GPS coordinates are sent to the collars on those animals, and those virtual fence lines are established. No burying wire, nothing of that sort of things. And then when the livestock start to approach those virtual fence lines, they're going to first be met with like a really high-pitched beep. And you train the animals to know that sound, and that's their cue to stop, turn around, and go back. They're not supposed to go any farther. If you have a stubborn cow or something of those types of sorts, and the cow decides to go beyond that virtual fence line, that's when she's going to be met with that electrical stimulus. The electrical stimulus, it's less than what a typical electric fence is strength-wise, and cows can only be shocked up to 3 times before the system cuts out for like animal welfare safety from that standpoint of it. And all of the companies run all those kind of basics of the tech. The major differences you might see between companies are whether they're cellular based. So if they run over the same system as like your cell phone would, where that's kind of Dan's case, I always say like, as long as you can send a text, that there's a good chance that the system will work in your area just fine. And we could be sitting here in Missouri and managing cows out in California if those cows are within cell range, which is just really crazy to think about. And then in situations where cell service might not be the best, or just in general, some of the companies require towers for their technology to work. And so tower or base station, you hear it referred to both ways. It basically just acts as a relay point. And so the collars talk to the tower, and then the tower talks to the nearest cell phone tower or Wi-Fi signal, just kind of relaying that information. And so those are sometimes probably the 2 biggest differences you'll see between companies, besides just little feature upgrades, little design differences, things like that. But that's kind of the basics on how it all works.
Yeah. And so I think I know the answer to this question, but just maybe to clarify, you mentioned if they have the cell phone company, or the company that offers a cell phone plan, that they could manipulate their grazing events, obviously virtually away from the farm if they were, say, on vacation or something like that. I would assume the same as if they have the towers, they can still, they don't have to be close to that tower to manage those fences, do they?
Nope, not at all.
Right.
So like, yeah, like big ranches and stuff like that, you could potentially have 6, 8 towers out on those ranches, and just the cows have to be within range of the tower, but you, the person sending the commands, do not.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what I guess folks know what company you're using, but also are you using the base towers, the base stations, or you have the cell phone?
I'm using the cellular version of the Gallagher eShepherd collars. Yep, I've got great cell service here. Kind of my proximity to St. Louis, we have quite a few cell towers, even though we're somewhat rugged in our terrain. It hasn't been an issue at all. Like Kaitlyn said, as long as you can send a text, so it doesn't even have to be that good of cell service. And one thing I think a lot of people maybe don't realize is the collar doesn't have to maintain cell service the entire time. That's just the commands you're sending it. Otherwise, it's linked to the satellite with a GPS location. So once that boundary is established, it's sort of tied to the collar, not necessarily tied to your phone. The collar is just communicating with that boundary you give it after that. So the cell signal's just for pushing information or seeing information, looking at the location of the cow.
Okay. So I guess the question maybe for both of you then is, if say you've got a cow or a few cows that are potentially on that edge of having that cell phone signal, if you were to make a change in that virtual fence that you say you wanted to move animals, and those cows were down at the creek bottom and didn't have that cell signal, how would that work? I guess maybe Kaitlyn, or do those animals not get that notification to move or whatever it might be, and the rest of the herd does? Or does it wait until all the animals are in cell signal to make that move or that change in the fence boundary?
I was like, Dan, do you want to take that from kind of your
Yeah.
perspective?
Yeah. So whenever you give the herd a new paddock, it waits for every collar to communicate with the
Okay.
system.
Okay.
And yeah, that's been kind of an interesting learning curve. The Gallagher said like a 10-minute update rate. Well, like you said, some collars may not be communicating or be out of range. So that 10 minutes becomes 20 or 30 sometimes, because it waits every 10 minutes to see how many collars it can communicate with. And then it does another 10 minutes. And so that's one thing it's taken me a little time to get used to, is that you give it a new paddock, it takes a little while sometimes.
Yeah. Does it send you a notification when that paddock change happens, or once all those animals get within cell signal, then you get some sort of a notification that they've moved, or that boundary's been
Yep.
dropped and a new one in place?
Yep, it tells you when that new paddock's activated, and you can look on the app. There's a status of the paddock update too, and it sort of loads like a loading bar. Say 95% ready, and that's basically means the systems communicate with most of the collars, just not all of them yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
And if livestock ever go in like a quote unquote dead zone, it's not like the collars stop working. Like Dan says, the previous virtual fence is still uploaded on those collars, so those cows will always be contained. It's just receiving their new GPS location or receiving that new kind of push of information won't happen until they walk back into cell service.
Yeah. That's good to know, and like I said, I heard you talk Friday, Kaitlyn, at a conference, and that was one thing that I'm sure myself and other producers that don't have virtual fences, but whenever we start putting our faith into technology, the technology fails at some point, right? Whether it's a short amount of time or a large amount of time, there's always some failures in technology. And so that was a concern that I had, is like, if you lose, say, a base station, or if you lose cell phone, say a tower goes down or whatever, are those cattle now just out roaming wherever there's now a hard boundary, like a electric fence or a hard electric fence or a barbed wire fence? So, but you're saying that, if you lose that signal, or if we lose something, that those animals are still confined to the old paddock kind of that you had set up, right?
Yep. And I think it's roughly like a 24-hour, they call it like emergency fence type of situation. So if the system does go down, your cows are contained to that same virtual fence for 24 hours to give you a time to like get a plan together if for some reason the system doesn't come back online by that point.
Yeah, we've had some of these issues where we lost communication with the collars, but they work. Gallagher, at least I know, works 24/7. They have a New Zealand team and they have a U.S. team, and like we were down on service one time, and they were working as quickly as they could to get that back up and going so we could move cattle. Gave me a little bit of peace of mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially like you said, if you're on vacation, for a few days, and I mean that's our biggest fear, whether we're using virtual fences or barbed wires, that the cattle are going to get out of our fences, right? And if we're putting all our faith into, my phone or a tablet or something that is not now a physical boundary, making sure that nothing goes haywire while you're on, and so I think that's something that
There's still a place for the permanent fence around whatever farm the cattle are on. That's absolutely necessary. Like Kaitlyn said, the shock stimulus they get's really not that powerful, not compared to a fence charger on a high tensile wire. It's not even close. And so, yeah, I wouldn't feel comfortable running this without a permanent fence. At least keep them on farm. And there's still a place to get out the polywire reel and step at the post too for making moves and different things. So that technology is still going to be useful too.
Yep,
Definitely. And I will say, oh, sorry, Landry.
No, you're probably going to answer the question I was going to ask. So go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, some of the companies do incorporate Bluetooth onto their collars. It's a really cool system. So like if one cow or one sheep or goat like is in cell service and they get the new command, they can walk into the area without cell service, and their collar will connect via Bluetooth to all the other collars in the herd. and transfer those new messages and kind of those new paddocks and things like that. And so that's something that some of the companies have currently, and I think a lot of them are kind of working towards from that standpoint too, to keep the herd more connected.
Well, that would connect the producer to the collar too. They would be able to walk out in the herd and maybe turn the collars off, or a little bit of fail safe. You're not relying on cell signal.
Right. I guess another question I have real quick, and then Joe, if you've got any, I'll let you kind of ask some. But another concern. Again, I'm just kind of thinking through this on my own herd. And I'm sure producers have other. Well, I know they do because I've heard them ask questions at conferences. But if an animal goes past that boundary that you've established, whether it's whether she's just ornery or she's maybe there's issues with predators or whatever it might be. Kind of, I guess, Kaitlyn, walk me through that process. Do they keep getting shocked as they leave that boundary, or do they have the ability to get back inside? And then how does that work? I mean, I guess just kind of walk me through that scenario if that was to happen.
Yeah, definitely. And so typically if a cow goes across that virtual fence line, like we said, she's going to get shocked up to 3 times. And those shocks are going to continue, like as she leaves the paddock, she'll continually get shocked. Or if she stops, she'll get shocked as like her sign, like, hey, go back type of a situation. After those 3, what'll typically happen is the producer would receive a notification on the app or like via text, cow 234 walked out of the boundary. And so 9 times out of 10, if it's one animal, she's going to stick close with the herd due to those herd instincts, and she'll be able to walk back into that virtual fence, no problem. It acts as a one-way gate. She's not going to get any type of stimulus or cues coming back in with the herd. And then the system will recognize she's back in, her collar will turn back on, and if she tries to leave again, she'll get those cues again. The other option is simply, I tell producers, okay, your cow gets out, you go into your app, you hit edit, you draw a couple more virtual fence posts, and you hit save. And then she's technically back in the fence. So those are kind of the 2 different options I typically walk producers through. But Dan, you can kind of talk on that from like your cows a little bit.
Yeah. So I've seen where I haven't had where a cow gets pushed by a predator or something, but you'll have that problem, some cow or something that likes to go ahead of the group, the fresh grass, and she'll get hit a few times, but they'll just sort of hang out close to the herd and then come back in. So really not a lot different than a physical fence, but actually probably easier for them to get back with the herd because they don't have to jump a fence or something, right?
Right.
And then, like Kaitlyn kind of mentioned, drawing a paddock to contain that one that's out. The first few times I used it, just getting comfortable with the system, I would have my small paddock made that I wanted them to graze for that day. Then I'd also draw a big one around the whole pasture that I could kick on, like if the group did get out or something. Just made me feel a little more comfortable. I could get the notification, go turn that on right away. But now I'm more comfortable with it.
Yeah. I know a lot of producers are skeptical of. I think it really opens the doors to changing the way that we've managed our grazing operation in the past, right? When I talk with producers about rotational grazing, the biggest thing that comes up on why maybe they don't want to do it is 1, they don't have the time, and 2, they don't have the infrastructure. They don't want to mess with polywire and unreel and reels and moving that, and if you can talk somebody into doing that, splitting a pasture into 2 pastures with polywire or however many that we can get them talked into, I don't have the time to go out there and move cattle. So I'm going to do it maybe once a week. Maybe I'm just going to, set up a paddock I'm moving on Saturday or Sunday when I'm off work from my regular day job. And so I think this really opens the doors to have producers be able to really intensely manage their grasses the way that we've kind of always hoped that producers would. That being said, though, I guess what are some, and I'll maybe throw this to you, Dan, obviously been working with it for a while. How have you seen it work on your operation? It's like what has changed since you've implemented these virtual fence collars, and are there still some things that you're skeptical of, or things that you're maybe if we had a Gallagher rep here with us today, what would be some things that you would say, hey, this is not quite there yet. Maybe we need to work on that before I kind of go both feet in.
Yeah, Landry, I'll answer the first part on kind of how I've seen it change, and then we'll go into maybe some of the problems I see with the system currently. So kind of we've had them since September, and getting into it now a few months. Labor is everything. You kind of hit on that, the ability to manage your grazing with less time. The labor's the game changer here with these collars, and I think that's how producers are going to figure out how to make it pay on their operation, is not necessarily in grazing management and more utilization of forage and better utilization, but the labor savings in that's where the real dollar is going to come back to the farm. Obviously, better utilization of your forage is going to pay too, but I think, in my opinion, got to look at this from a labor standpoint, because it's not too expensive for the polywire and step in post tech and be able to manage that way. And that's how I was doing this prior. But we've really, kind of expanded this labor side of the farm. I'm already thinking, just me as an individual, how many more cows I could run, how many more farms I could run. And like one thing that the Center for Region really wanted to look at with these collars is how you can run cattle on crop ground. And it's, it's really got the wheels turning here. I can, like Andrew mentioned, I went on vacation last week, and I was actually out of cell service the entire time we were down southern Missouri. And so I set these cattle up on a schedule. They got moved every 4 hours across cereal rye, and it was corn stalks from last year. And, I would have had to have, paid somebody or had a family member come roll polywire up every 4 hours to get that kind of utilization, that usage out of that. And that's, that was a quick, easy, labor solution there, to just set them up on a schedule. I had the peace of mind while I was away with my family that, I knew where the cattle were at, for one. If I came into cell service, I could look at the app, and then I would have never achieved that sort of managed grazing like that, without boots on the ground. So labor's huge. Because I don't think these collars are going to change the way I was managing my grazing. High intensity, short-term high intensity grazes followed by long rest periods. Those principles still, are in place. It's the time it takes me to go implement those principles, right? And so diving into the second part of your question, if I had a Gallagher rep here, what would I ask them? There's been one thing, Kaitlyn and I have kind of expressed this change we want, but when I look at managed grazing, I'm measuring my forage or taking account of the forage that's ahead of the cow for the next day or the next 4 hours. And I kind of know an area. You can measure the forage and determine an area that the 30 cows need for that day, right? That area is not real clear in the system that Gallagher has set up. When you draw a new virtual paddock, it's not that easy to see what that acreage is, of the new paddock. And for me, when I go to move them, I'm not always moving them on a schedule. I go walk out there. I see how they grazed the day before. I'm looking at the forage that's ahead of them. Did they leave enough behind? Did they trample enough? And so I need to make quick adjustments, like I did with my polywire. Sometimes I'd move that front fence either forward or backward a little bit to give a little more or a little less area. And I was doing that in another pasture management app, and I could very quickly see what that area was while I was standing there. Not as simple, not as straightforward in the Gallagher app currently. I'm sure they'll make that change, but
so you're saying when you set that boundary, it's not displaying how many acres that is, and that's what, like, if you're going to give them 1/10 of an acre one day and you realize that wasn't enough and you wanted to give them 2/10 of an acre the next day, when you make that new pasture, that new paddock, it's not saying that this is 2/10 of an acre. You're just kind of going off of the visual reference.
Right. So what's a little bit tricky is you have to incorporate the last paddock in the new paddock, so the cows are included in the new move. So you basically just imagine if you did it with polywire, you'd have your current paddock, and then you'd take another piece of polywire and you make a bigger circle around them, right? That's how you have to kind of draw it out on Gallagher's app currently. And when you draw that bigger area outside the smaller area that they were currently grazing, that difference isn't very clear. And it's more clear on the desktop version, and you can kind of see better on that. But when I'm managing my grazing, it's boots on the ground, right? And I'm standing in the herd. I looked at how they grazed, and I'm looking at the forage ahead of them, and I kind of want to do this on the fly. That way I keep my adaptive grazing the way I want. This could very easily be set up to where you don't look at your cows every day. I'm trying very hard with this technology to still be out there every day like I was when I was rolling out polywire. So I would like to see the app be a little more functional in the field, and to use it more that way.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. Well, and I think you hit on. Go ahead, Kaitlyn.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I was like, I think this would be a good time to pull up the moves and let Dan kind of explain kind of what he was doing with the 4-hour moves and stuff like that, if that's cool with you, Landry. I can pull
Absolutely,
that
yes, please do.
slide up. Yeah.
Yep.
I can easier to explain than me describing it.
I was like, can you guys see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay.
Can you
Perfect.
can you enlarge it just a little
Yep.
bit?
Can you make
Oh, we'll see. There we go.
Perfect.
Sweet.
Yeah, so what we're looking at here is my spring cows calving right now, and I've got them out on the cereal rye and corn stalks. And so this was when I was gone on vacation, and they got this new area every 4 hours. And I did this in the desktop version where you set up your scheduled moves, and I just kind of determined an area just based off experience of grazing this rye at this stage. And yeah, and you can kind of see the yellow lines are the previous boundaries, the orange is the current one. Then there's some bolder, like striped lines out ahead of that group there. You can see toward the left of the screen. And so this kind of shows how, as you're moving forward, and this is going to be a little different than in a like a perennial pasture where I don't want them to bat graze. In this situation, there's a bat graze going on. They're going back to water. Not real concerned about regrowth in this annual forage here. But you can kind of see how every move you'd incorporate the herd into the new move. You wouldn't necessarily just draw a teeny little 1/4 acre paddock out ahead of them. You have to incorporate the whole herd in that move.
Right. Yeah.
To me, it's a little clunky doing it that way. I'd rather just draw a new polygon ahead of them, not worry about it, to make it easier going into this, grazing perennial pastures this summer, where I don't want them to bat graze, where I'm moving water with the herd. It'd be nice if I didn't have to include that old paddock in the new paddock.
Right.
I am hopeful that
Right.
Gallagher will change that. Kaitlyn probably knows better than I do, but I think halters is sort of set up a little differently, where that new paddock is, you don't have to include it. It just has to be touching. Is that right?
Yep.
To me, that would be a little easier to manage. I don't know if I'm explaining this the best, but that's the big issue I see with really putting this into an adaptive grazing system, where I'm moving quite frequently, and I don't want any bat grazing to occur, so I get my good rest periods.
Yeah.
I don't
Are
think
you?
the what?
I was just going to say real quick. Looking at you said you're calving right now, Dan. Is that right?
Yep.
Have you had any issues? And when I saw your picture there, it made me think of some issues that I've had with like single strand hot wire fences and calving next to those, and where those calves would, new calves, like 2 or 3 day old, would go and lay underneath across the electric fence from where the mama was, and the mama couldn't get to them.
Yeah.
I've had some predation issues may not, in a wheat system like that, or in an annual crop like that, may not be an issue. But have you seen anything like that, or does that concern you in any bit? Or even when these calves get older, those calves like to run and play, and if they're going to get outside of that boundary, is there any concern with maybe not having those animals tagged or collared, or being able to control them to some degree?
Yeah. So first part of your question, new baby calves on the ground. Yeah, kind of like you do with a single strand wire. You go out and check your cows, and I kick those calves up and kind of get them to go back with mom. I had a couple cows this year, where I would tag that calf within the first few hours, and that sometimes the calves take off running after that. I've had a couple cows follow them through the virtual fence, just follow their calf, and maternal instinct took totally over. Those cows took that shock, the 3 shocks, and they just went on because they were going to follow their calf no matter what. So that was a kind of a little learning deal for me. I figured out that I probably need to give them bigger area while they're calving, and just to make them more comfortable, and just be kind of aware of when I'm tagging them or where I'm tagging them, maybe, so I don't just force that cow to. I don't want her to get shocked. She doesn't have to, right? The animal husband coming in here, so that was a learning moment for me. Moving into later in the season as the calves get bigger, when I was making moves every day with a single strand of polywire, I was fine with the calves scooting under that and getting ahead of the cow and getting the best forage ahead of that. Call that creep grazing, right? So I see going forward this summer, I don't see that being an issue at all. And there'll be times where I'm going to have to get the reel and polywire out and contain some calves, right? There'll be some areas where I don't want them to go. And so you're still going to have to get out the old technology, right? And make it work. This is just kind of a tool within your operation, is the way I'm seeing it.
Dan, can you tell them about some of the cool things you've been using the virtual fence for calving, like telling when a cow is calved and tagging them and stuff like that?
Yeah, so super cool. So, let's look at this picture, and let's just say that cow on the far left, you could probably just take a guess that she's calving, right? If I open up my app and I look and I see that 8114 is hanging off by herself, and let's just say one night, one instance, it was about 9-10 o'clock at night, I noticed a cow off by herself, and I knew she was close to calve. I'd seen her that day. And so I could pretty much guarantee you that when I get there in the morning, there's going to be a calf on the ground. So I went ahead and wrote my tag out for that cow and that calf, and walked right up and tagged that calf the next morning. There was no approaching the cow first, seeing what tag number that was, going back to the truck, writing the tag out. That was kind of a neat thing, that when we collared these cows in September, that hadn't even dawned on me that I could use these collars for that. So, thought that was pretty cool. That was a little more of a low stress way of tagging the calf, because as you know, sometimes you go check out the cow to find out what tag number she was, and she picks up her calf and leaves, right? So
Yeah.
it little time saver there, a little lower stress on everybody. And I've done that quite a few times. I've found the cow on the app that's off by herself and went ahead and had the tag wrote up before I got there. So.
One of the concerns that I've heard from producers, and rightfully so, is that this technology is going to take away from that being out there every day or every couple of days to manage your forage, and taking those observations, whether it's from a forage standpoint or for an animal health standpoint. And I think people have to realize that, obviously this technology would allow you to do that, right? If it may even give you, depending on your situation, this may allow you more connection with your animals than putting them on a piece of rent ground that you only see once a week, right? At least you would know. At least you'd know where they were at if something got out. But I think that the key is to use this as just a tool in the toolbox, right? It's allowing you that opportunity. You mentioned less labor involved, which is obviously a good thing. But I think that peace of mind, being able to get away and spend some time with the family on a vacation and not be stressed out that, what's happening back on the farm, or having to have a family member or a hired hand keep an eye on things while you're gone. You can do that now. So I think that's huge for cattle producers, because as we know, cattle producers don't like to leave the operation. They don't like to be able, to be away, especially during times where they feel like they need to be there. So I think that's huge. The other thing is just the small things. Like I've heard Kaitlyn talk in the conferences that I've attended with her speaking. I know some of the companies have LED lights that they can turn on, or that the producer can turn on to single out an animal. Kind of that same situation if you had one calving, or if it was heifers and you need to go out there and check that animal, you could turn that light on or whatever and really pinpoint that. I mean, just little things like that in turn give us peace of mind, that make our operation a little more easily managed. I think are huge and somewhat overlooked. I mean, I know there's an economic ROI to these from for more utilization of our forages and less labor, costs of labor, but there's a lot of things on the backside that we kind of forget about, or we may take for granted as cattle producers. And this really just kind of opens up the ability to do things differently, not only from a forage management standpoint, but just from an operational standpoint. So.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I always say producers' imagination is kind of the limit when it comes to the technology. Just watching producers, how Dan's figuring out how to utilize it during calving season and stuff like that. It's so much fun to hear that I tried this new this week. Oh, this worked this week. I'm gonna try this next week. It's so much fun to just kind of see the progression and how the producers are using it, and how it's growing all over the state.
Yeah, no, I think it's awesome work that MU's doing, and like I said, getting this technology into producers' hands and really letting them experience what it would be like if they were, if they had this system in place. Dan, I guess just looking at this picture on the left here, is there? I mean, that looks like that's a pretty hard line, from kind of the graze to ungrazed. Is that pretty typical? Is it that straight and narrow?
Yeah, that's something I've been really impressed with, is the accuracy of these things. It looks like a straight line you from a polywire, right?
Yeah.
It's just as straight as can be. Gallagher had said that the accuracy was 10 foot plus minus. It's far more accurate than that from my experience. And I grazed Milo this winter, which is some very high density grazing, and they kept that line perfect across that Milo. So, yep.
Well, and I think, yeah, and that kind of goes.
Dan, right there.
Yep.
Yeah, there you go. That's crazy. And that kind of brings up another point there, though, is I don't have Milo to graze where I'm at down here in Southwest Missouri, but I can imagine trying to string a polywire through that stuff in the wintertime with snow and ice, and the interference of the stalks and everything could be a nightmare. That would deter me from trying to do daily moves, or I'd want to just give them a week's worth so I didn't have to move that dang fence every day. And so I think something like this obviously is a remedy to that situation. And not only this, and Dan, you can talk about this more and how you're applying it, but because I've seen some slides from Clayton's presentations before, but given this the ability not only to increase our utilization of forages, but also put fences where we may have not had fences in the past, to utilize another watering source, or give them access to shade close to a river or creek maybe, but we didn't have really fence there to begin with, or it was barbed wire. Now we have the ability to give them some shade, or give them access to water that we didn't have before. So I guess maybe kind of talk about how you're utilizing, from that standpoint, in your operation. Are there areas that you're using this fence outside of areas that you have typically grazed in the past because you didn't have that infrastructure in place?
Yes and no. Yeah, you're kind of only limited by your imagination, right? But one thing that the Center for Region wanted to look at was how to use these on crop ground, which I already have perimeter fence on this crop ground, so I've been grazing it previously. But it was like you hit on there, Landry, where I'm getting more utilization out of that real crop ground instead of maybe just giving them a week's worth at a time, right? In the dead of winter, when the ground's frozen, you can't put step-in posts in. That part has changed, right? I'm able to maintain high levels of utilization, even though I'm maybe don't want to bundle up and go out there and drill holes in the ground with the masonry bit so I can get step-in post in, right? It's like, it doesn't have to be that hard anymore.
Right.
I had grazed Milo the last 2 winters, the old school way, I guess you could say, with polywire on reels. And this past winter with the collars, it was kind of like being on vacation. It was I didn't know what to do with myself. But that would take a couple hours in the morning, every morning, especially when it's frozen, to move that fence. And with the collars, it was just so much easier. And I think looking at water, kind of getting creative with watering points and things. One thing I had done on a rental farm that it has some frost-free waters on it. Yeah, Kaitlyn should have a picture.
I was like, I have this one.
Yeah, so there are some watering points on it, but there is a good creek that runs through there. And being a rental farm, I don't have fence to exclude them from the creek or different things like that. Not a lot of infrastructure there. But what I was able to do, I could water them out of the creek with the collars, and I would limit their access to the creek kind of to the best spot, maybe where they weren't tearing up like a steep bank or something. And then I could move that access point kind of down the creek every few days so they didn't beat up on one spot. That would kind of move. And you can go back and look, and it's I still have forage in place right up to the water and stuff. They didn't turn it into a mud hole or anything because I was really able to limit their access with the collars. Not an easy thing to do with posts, especially in gravelly creeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was pretty neat. Again, something I didn't think about when we collared in September. These things just sort of come to you as you're grazing. Just again, you're kind of stuck in the maybe in the paradigm of physical fence, right? And sometimes it's hard to think outside the box. But once you get into these virtual fence collars, it start to realize how differently they can be used. I'm sure I've got a lot more to learn, a lot more scenarios to play these things out, but that's a couple examples. One more would be this river we're on has a pretty bad habit of flooding and flooding pretty frequently. A lot of my pastures are down along the river, and so obviously when the river gets up, the electric fence is no more. Usually wipes out certain spots. And so I had the cows in a spot where their one border of the permanent fence went underwater. And so I had the peace of mind of just drawing a boundary that contained that group of cows. And when the floodwaters receded overnight, I didn't have to worry about them finding that hole in the fence. I slept easy that night. And then, once the floodwaters went down, I go fix that fence, but those cows were still contained. That was kind of neat.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think, and I've heard Kaitlyn talk about it, but I think being able to use this technology as exclusion zones, right? There's always places on our farm that we'd probably not like to see our cattle hang out, but due to our infrastructure, we just can't do that, whether it's a creek bottom or a sensitive, areas that are, or whatever it might be. And so, I think just not only having the ability to keep animals in with this technology, but also having the ability to keep animals out of areas that we don't want them.
That's like this rental farm you can see here on the right of the screen. There's a few permanent fences on it, and I would pull polywire with a solar charger in some places to manage my grazing, but a lot of times it was difficult for me to exclude them out of that timber there on the north side of the field there. You can see where that boundary was drawn around the timber. I had never done that before on that farm. Just don't have any fence in place there. And so, the exclusion zones, that's a big one.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was like, Dan, can you talk to them a little bit, like, about how you've gone away from just like the perfect squares and stuff like that? Like, I feel like when people think about rotational grazing, it's like a perfect box, or even like how you do the alley to like move the cows across the pasture and stuff like that.
Yep. Again, that's that paradigm of a physical fence that, I still have in my head, and I'm sure a lot of producers will have in their head. Everything kind of has to be straight. It's hard to do too many curves and things, but especially like starting out in a new paddock or where a new water source is, a lot of times you kind of give up maybe some area because you have to keep it straight with a physical fence. You can get kind of creative and make a circle around that first watering point, right? And just things like that. I mean, again, you're only limited by your imagination. Yeah, I've gently moved them, and I want to emphasize gently because you can't really push them too hard, without a they don't have this visual cue of a fence, right? So you can't really blame them for taking off and running through the boundary you drew. You know where you drew the boundary, but they don't know till they hear that tone. And so I've gently moved the cow groups a couple times by drawing some lanes across the farm, pretty wide lanes, probably wider than I would with polywire, and then just sort of let them naturally move up to the catch pen. And then I did that one time over kind of a couple day period, and I had drawn some back fences in that lane. So as they came up to the catch pen, I put a back fence up, and it was just kind of a natural, low stress way of moving them up toward the catch pen. But it worked really well. I didn't have to, it would have taken me hours of putting up some temporary fence to build those lanes and get them up close on that 100-acre farm, get them up close to the catch pen. So that was pretty fun.
Well, and yeah, and just thinking that through again, kind of own operation or even somebody else. But if you knew that you were going to see work calves or do some work to the animals, you need them, in the chute or in the corral, just next weekend or 2 weeks from now, and they were on the backside of the farm, instead of either trying to do that manually the day of, having that ability to gently push those animals up towards maybe the catch pen or to an area that you could then get them into the corral. I mean, that would save a lot of time. And hey, especially out west, I can imagine for folks that might be listening to this that have large expanses of acreage, and their fields are 600 acres in size. Just having that ability to be able to corral those animals and know where your animals are at, making sure that you've got them all. There's just so many things that I think this stuff could do, not only from just forage utilization standpoint, but just operational standpoint.
Yep. If a lot of people express concerns over animal husbandry with these, but if you go into it with that in your mind, that this is a tool that can be used with animal husbandry practices, that's where things really start to happen. I think it could only amplify that if you use it in the right way.
Yeah.
And that's why training is such a big key. Like on average, they say training takes 5 to 7 days. I'd say that's very standard. Some cows learn it way faster. Some cows struggle with it more. And I've heard of scenarios where producers have just pulled a cow from a herd because she just can't quite wrap her head around what she's trying to learn in situations like that. But yeah, the first couple times they hear that sound or get that shocked, you're going to get a pretty funny reaction out of that cow. But she picks up on it really fast. And that's the big key component to it. They have to be trained, and you have to teach them how to respond to make the system work really successfully.
What are you seeing about the same length of training in the small ruminants, Kaitlyn?
Yeah, I would say that 5 to 7 day period is pretty standard across the board for the majority of the livestock that I've worked with.
I see.
And that was the question I was going to ask you. I didn't think we covered is kind of what that time frame is on how that works. And if I remember correctly, Kaitlyn, correct me if I'm wrong, essentially that training process is putting those animals in a hard boundary pasture paddock, small enough that that they know where those boundaries are, drawing your perimeter, drawing your virtual fence around that, and then kind of over time just shrinking that paddock down to include only the virtual fence as their boundary. Is that kind of how that's done?
Yep, exactly. Main physically fenced area, virtual fence around the outside, and then every day just move one side of that virtual fence in closer and closer to about your pen is about half the original size. Just letting the livestock really start to associate those sound and shot cues with that physical barrier. And that's the fastest way for them to learn.
Okay. Dan, was that kind of, how long did it take your animals you felt comfortable rolling them out into an area?
Yeah, I think it was about 5 days. Yeah, it went just like that. I had them in permanent paddocks and shrunk those. I actually was cutting corners off, so it was kind of more of a rounded boundary. That way, yeah, I didn't want them to get up into a corner of a permanent fence 90 degrees to a virtual paddock and kind of confuse them, right? So again,
Yeah,
you don't have to deal in straight lines here.
Yeah, that's a really good point. When it comes to the cows and virtual fence, always go more room versus less room. When especially like around water points, when it comes to training, no angle smaller than 90 degrees. You have to make the system like make it easy to understand for the cows.
And you can kind of see in this photo in the light dashed lines is some of the old boundaries. If you look, a lot of them are got curved corners and things.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The only other thing that I really had here to discuss, and it may not take that long, and Kaitlyn, you can just talk about it as in depth as you feel comfortable talking about it, but it's cost. You know, I know that it's not a cheap endeavor to adopt virtual fences, and I know every company is going to be a little bit different, right, on what their price point is, and we don't need to go into every company and their structure and how all that, but what can folks kind of expect to pay on average for this technology? And then is there anything out there to help producers maybe offset the costs of this technology if they're willing to adapt it?
Yeah, definitely. So cost is by far the biggest barrier for producers coming into the technology. A lot of producers have plans in place, they're ready to use it, they want to use it, and then the price tag is kind of what stops them in their tracks. Um, on average, I would say a producer is going to pay anywhere from like $250 to $350 per collar per animal. There's two different ways the pricing structures work. So the majority of companies, a producer pays upfront for that collar, and that's where you see that on average $250 to $350 per collar come into place. Some companies you don't pay anything upfront for the collar, but you pay a higher like annual subscription fee. And so for the company that does that, you're looking at roughly $72 per collar per year type of a situation. What then you have to start incorporating is like I call it like the data fees. So every company you're either going to pay a monthly or a yearly data fee. On average, that ranges from $1.50 to $2 like per animal per month. Or you're looking at roughly $45 per animal per year is what you're going to expect for that. And so between the upfront cost of the collars and then kind of those yearly data fees, those are the two biggest cost components. The other ones are like if you do go with a company that requires a base station, those base stations can run anywhere from $4,000 a piece all the way. The most expensive is $10,000 a piece. And so depending on the number of base stations you potentially need, that can also kind of play into those price factors as well. There are programs in place. Missouri NRCS rolled out a virtual fence cost share program this last year. Producers can apply to be a part of that year round, and then they'll hear about it if they were accepted during like the batching periods. And it's a really competitive program, and they're offering a really great cost share. I was like, I lost the word in my head. Cost share option for producers. The producers would get it would be a 5-year program. The producers would get a certain amount of money per collar per year to start with, and then they would also receive a base payment to go towards the cost of a tower or covering the cost of those cellular collars the rest of the way. And then years 2 through 5, they would receive a payment per year per collar, essentially to help a producer cover those costs. And doing the math kind of on my end, just like roughly, it would cover a lot of those costs for producers. So I'm really excited to see that project roll out. Soil and water conservation districts in Missouri had talked about getting a program started. Not sure where they're at with that, but it has just been kind of brought up to me. The center is looking at potential options to help cost share producers. We're not sure exactly what that's going to look like, but we're hoping to hopefully get something in place here in the next little bit to do that. But there are options out there. Every U.S. state should have the EQIP program up and running. It's been approved nationally, whether it's starting on a state level, that's more state-based, what year that's going to start. And so I just encourage folks, talk to your local NRCS offices. There's typically grants and other different things out there for producers as well. The more popular the technology gets, the more we're going to start to see those cost share options open up.
Yeah. No, I think I think it's great that they're offering that as part of their equip program, and you know, from a conservation planning standpoint, that only, in my opinion, would make it easier for them, because I would assume there's probably, from a documentation standpoint, at the end of the year, you know, they want to know the history and the documentation that you have to prove that you were moving the animals like you said you were going to move them, and giving it the rest that you said you were going to get. And so I would assume this is probably just kind of a click of a few buttons, and you could probably send some sort of a spreadsheet or um, you know, some sort of document to them to help um, make sure that you're in compliance with their program. So
Oh yeah, super easily. There's even like track features on some of the collars. So you can select like your whole herd, or you can select one cow, and you can go back and it'll show you the exact points that she was at in the pasture, like throughout the day or over the last 2 weeks or anything like that. Like it is high tech tracking what your cattle are doing with these collars. It is really cool information to see.
yeah, yeah, that is cool. And I guess that kind of leads me, and this is probably my last question that I have for you, for both of you, is where do you see this? And maybe this is a two-part question. One would be, I would assume with any new technology, it seems like it evolves fairly rapidly, right? When TV went to flat screens, it was plasma and then LCD. You know, at some point, it just revolves so fast. Is it worth jumping in now, or waiting until they kind of get everything worked out before a producer jumps in? And that maybe that's not a concern. Maybe the technology is not going to change. The infrastructure that you have in place is not going to change. There just may be software updates or something like that. But I guess, and Dan, if you're familiar with this, but Kaitlyn, where do you see the technology going? What's the kind of the next steps? And it's weird to say that the next steps, because it seems like it's just shown up in United States here. But you know, it just evolves so fast. Where's kind of the next step for these technologies, for these companies?
I would say definitely the animal health standpoint of things, like calving detection alerts, heat detection alerts, just kind of more deep diving into like the movement of cattle and potentially being able to look at like their movements and like when they move, how much they move to determine like if an animal's possibly becoming sick or different things like that. Just a lot of those big animal health components. That's a really big thing that I would say all the companies are kind of racing towards right now. And it's not like an if it's going to happen, it's more like a when it's going to happen. I wouldn't be surprised by the end of the year if we see a lot of those animal health updates. There's also talk, a lot of the companies talk about going to fully satellite based collars and getting rid of like the need for cell service or the need for a tower in general. And so that's another potential update I could see coming in the future. We might see some collar redesigns. I don't think it would be anything crazy from that standpoint. I mean, um, otherwise, a lot of the updates that I think the systems would end up getting would be software updates, would be my hope at least. So that way it would be just updating the software, and that way a producer that might have already purchased the technology wouldn't have to go out and buy new collars or something like that. Or if that was the case, I would hope there would be some sort of buyback program or something like that. But that's the big question mark. They don't tell me all their secrets, unfortunately. But I try.
The only two things I had left that we hadn't checked off were the training and the, kind of the future advancements. And I think we've covered those. Maybe Kaitlyn or Dan, can you speak to, back to animal husbandry and safety? Even if an animal would get hung up in a fence or some brush or something, there's, these collars are designed to break off under a certain force. And
Dan, do you want to take that or do you want me to?
Yeah, well, just kind of what you told me, Caitlin. I know they're designed to break under a certain amount of force. I haven't had any break yet, uh, but yeah, I suppose I'm just trusting that the company has those in place, because I could see it be a problem. So
I've seen it happen a couple of times where something's gotten hung up and they've applied enough pressure and the collar's broke, like at a breaking point to let that animal be free. There's also the animal safety alerts in place as kind of another backup safety. So like if a cow gets stuck in the creek or something, or a cow breaks her leg, or if a collar falls off, unfortunately, you'll get a notification that the collar hasn't moved or the cow hasn't moved in a while. And it'll show up as like an alert on your phone. It'll be like, go check cow 243 type of a situation. And so they also have those like safety aspects in place too with the collars.
on the flip side of that, with the collars falling off, I've been curious how durable they are going to be and that they'll hold up. you got cows rubbing on trees and things. That's just sort of in their nature, or, they're hitting it on the water and things. And so I've been kind of curious how the durability of these things are going to be. And obviously we're going to learn a lot more as time goes on. The project's 3 years long. So that's one that maybe, before, because I personally want to purchase some more collars to continue to collar more of the herd, but that's probably where personally I'm going to wait and kind of see maybe at the end of 3 years where durability fell among the companies. Because a lot of these I think are warranted for 3 years?
3 to 4.
So, yeah. And so what does the collar look like in 3 years? And I think that's maybe where I'm going to put a lot of judgment on before purchasing some collars of my own.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I got to believe that one of the things that I would want to look at is I think there's some companies that maybe don't have a solar panel on the collar, and so you would potentially have to replace that battery whenever it died. The fact of just having to get animals up to change collars out, or to fix the collar, or to put new ones on them, I think would be the biggest headache of this whole system. If that happens on a fairly consistent basis, right? We've got those animals up, a couple times, 3 times ways to work them, to do whatever we need to do to them. But if you got one animal that you got to split off from the herd because her collar broke or whatever it might be, if you have to do that on a pretty regular basis, that's going to get frustrating.
Yeah.
So yeah, durability would be a huge thing for sure.
Definitely. And just, I think that's where you almost do a little bit trade-off of labor. You might not be out there putting up fences and stuff like that all the time, but you really want to monitor what those collars are looking like on the necks of those animals. You don't want to get a situation where it's too tight and something's rubbing. Be out there. Another good reason, be boots on the ground, be vigilant out there with your cows and kind of watching for stuff like that.
And that's a great point. It's a trade-off of labor for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Great point.
Yeah.
Then,
All right. Well, that's
go ahead, Lil. Just one of the last things, you've obviously been kind of doing the virtual fence tour the last few months. I know we're going to have you at our 4R and Soil Health Field Day at the end of June, but for those folks who haven't seen Kaitlyn or Dan in person yet, it's a great opportunity to hear their aspects face to face, ask some good questions. Kaitlyn, I know a lot of times you have the collars on hand where attendees can actually get hands on the collars and see the technology themselves. Do you have any events coming up that you want to get on folks' radar in the near future? Or
that's actually a great reminder. Thank you. There's going to be a virtual fence field day kind of coming up at Columbia, or at the university. It's probably at the University of Missouri South Farm. Well, I'm gonna step back on that. It's gonna be somewhere around Columbia. All of the details haven't been worked out yet. We're looking at June 25th is the time frame right now, and we'll kind of work that out and send those details out to the public. But that's gonna be a really great opportunity. We're gonna hopefully have all of the companies there to talk about their products, get all the producers there in person, and really kind of show off what we've been doing the last about year and a half, some of the research projects up and coming with it, and give producers a really good chance to kind of see the technology in action and hear about it from producers using it firsthand. And you don't have to go to an event to call and ask, or to ask questions or kind of see the technology work. That's one of the pros of having Dan and the other private producers and the other university research farms, is I get to give out their cell phone numbers, and people get to go out to their houses and kind of see the collars in action and stuff like that. And so people can always call and email me, and I'm happy to get them set up to go see it work in the field and answer any questions they have.
Yeah, they may want to call Dan ahead of time if they're going to show up. Just make sure it's not 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Give them a heads up.
We get it. Yeah, we get it set up.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. Shameless plug for our event and for University of Missouri's as well. So
Yeah. I'll get that information over to you guys when we have it all set in stone.
great. All right. Well, folks, if that's it, unless anybody has anything else, I think we'll kind of wrap this one up. I really appreciate both of you being here today, Dan and Kaitlyn. I know you guys got a lot of things going on right now, so I appreciate your time joining us, and appreciate everyone listening today. Until then, we'll catch you on the next one.
Sounds great.
Good. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Made for Agriculture, brought to you by MFA, your whole farm solution.